So I've seen a few changes, but of course Project Pegasus is something else. Also forget, fortunately with the passage of time, is probably how many years that has taken of meticulous planning.
3 weeks ago, inside a Buckingham Palace household meeting, Princess Anne asked one question. She did not raise her voice. She did not make a scene. She simply asked why a senior household instruction had been changed without her office being informed. The room went silent, not because the question was aggressive, because everyone present understood that Anne already knew the answer and was asking it anyway. Camilla had made the change. Anne had noticed, and the staff standing in that corridor understood in that moment that they were watching something that had been building for 30 years finally reach the surface. What happened next? What Charles did when he saw it? What the institutional record shows about the outcome, and what sources say it reveals about where real power sits inside the British monarchy in 2026, is what this video maps in full. Named sources, documented context, the complete picture. Before we go any further, if you are new to Palace Drop, hit subscribe and turn notifications on right now. We cover the royal family the way it actually happens, not the polished palace version. Every video goes deeper than the last, and this story goes back 30 years. Stay with us. If you have been watching this channel, you already know that William has been making deliberate financial and institutional moves that sources describe as systematically reshaping Camilla's position inside the monarchy. The Duchy of Cornwall financial records showing Annabel Elliott's removal. The Tom Parker Bowles proposal being blocked with a counter-proposal so complete that Camilla had to withdraw entirely. The quiet narrowing of access for her family across royal events and official occasions. What we are about to show you is that William is not doing this alone, and the person working alongside him has been watching and waiting for considerably longer than he has. Princess Anne is 75 years old. She has given over 5 decades of uninterrupted royal service, without scandal, without public complaint, and without deviation from the standard of duty she set for herself decades ago. Consistently among the highest engagement counts of any working royal for most of her adult life. Decades of charitable work that built genuine institutional relationships across virtually every sector of British public life. A reputation inside the palace that sources consistently describe using one specific word: reliable. That reliability is not simply a personality trait. It is an institutional asset of enormous value, and Anne has been building it deliberately for 50 years. She built it through everything, through the affairs, through the Camilla Gate tapes published across the British press in 1993, through Charles's television confession to Jonathan Dimbleby in 1994, in which he publicly acknowledged the relationship with Camilla, through Diana's Panorama interview in November 1995, through the divorce in 1996, through Diana's death in that Paris tunnel in August 1997, through the years of careful rehabilitation that followed, through the coronation in May 2023 when Camilla walked into Westminster Abbey and took the seat beside the king. Anne managed her private feelings about every stage of that 30-year arc, the way she manages everything, professionally, quietly, without public statement. For nearly 3 decades, institutional loyalty held. Sources suggest something fundamental changed in the past 18 months. The shift did not happen in one dramatic moment. It happened as 2 things changed simultaneously. Charles's health situation reduced his capacity for sustained internal conflict in ways that sources familiar with the household describe as significant. And William's operational control over the Duchy of Cornwall gave him financial and institutional leverage that made direct confrontation possible in ways it had not been before. Anne watched both of those changes happen. Sources say she made a decision. She was done waiting. Drop in the comments right now where you are watching from. Country or city, we want to know where the Palace Drop community is based around the world. Drop it below and stay with us, because what comes next is the part of this story that is making certain people inside the palace genuinely uncomfortable. The household meeting where the confrontation occurred was not a dramatic summit convened specifically to address tension. It was a routine internal briefing about an upcoming official royal engagement, the kind of operational meeting that takes place dozens of times a week inside the palace machinery. An official royal engagement means a public appearance carried out on behalf of the crown. The planned sequence of who enters first, who holds ceremonial authority, who is given what institutional positioning. All of this is determined in advance through a consultative process involving senior household members. These decisions communicate something to the institution and to the public about hierarchy, trust, and operational authority. They are not simply logistical, they are signals. Camilla had approved a change to that sequence without going through the standard consultative process. The change placed her preferred attendants in positions that had previously been allocated differently following established household protocol. A household protocol means the set of internal rules governing how operational decisions are made inside a royal household. They exist specifically to prevent any single member from making unilateral decisions that affect the institutional standing of others. They are the operational foundation of how the palace functions. To an outside observer, the change might have appeared minor, an adjustment to a schedule. Inside the palace, it communicated something else entirely. It communicated that the queen consort believed she held the authority to make unilateral decisions about household operations without the consultation that established protocol required. Anne noticed immediately. She asked why the change had been made without her office being informed. The question was calm, precise, phrased in procedural language rather than personal language. Not an accusation, not an emotional challenge. A request for a procedural explanation of a procedural decision. And it was impossible to answer satisfactorily, because the honest answer was that the consultation had been bypassed deliberately, that the established process had been circumvented by someone who believed their position gave them the authority to circumvent it. And everyone standing in that room already understood that before a single word of response had been offered. What happened in the seconds that followed is what sources describe as the moment the dynamic shifted permanently. Staff inside a royal palace household are trained observers. Their entire professional existence depends on reading rooms correctly, understanding where authority actually sits at any given moment, and responding accordingly. They do not defer to titles alone. They defer to demonstrated institutional authority, to the accumulated weight of decades of reliable service. To the person whose judgment the institution has consistently validated, Anne has been building that weight for 50 years. When Anne spoke in that corridor, staff responded the way they always respond to Anne. They listened. They waited. They did not look to Camilla for a countersignal before deciding how to position themselves. That instinctive response, staff orienting toward Anne rather than toward the queen consort in a moment of institutional uncertainty, is itself one of the most significant details in this entire story. Camilla's response to Anne's question was to challenge the question itself. Sources familiar with the exchange describe her framing Anne's calm correction as an attempt to undermine the queen consort's position in front of palace staff. She suggested that Anne's challenge was not procedural but personal, that the real motivation was not institutional integrity, but the 30-year history between them. Anne did not take the bait. She did not escalate to personal language. She did not reference history. She did not raise her voice. She maintained her procedural ground and repeated her position in plain institutional terms. The change broke established protocol. The change needed to be reversed. That restraint was devastating precisely because of how complete it was. Camilla was visibly and audibly frustrated. Anne was visibly and demonstrably calm. And every member of staff in that corridor was watching both responses simultaneously and drawing their own conclusions about which one reflected the institutional standard the palace was built on. Charles entered the situation at the point when the damage to the room's atmosphere was already visible. According to sources familiar with what followed, the king assessed the situation quickly. He looked from his wife to his sister. He read the room. He made a decision. He confirmed that the original household schedule would be restored, He confirmed this in front of the same staff who had just witnessed the entire exchange. He did not take Camilla aside privately. He made the institutional decision in the institutional space where the question had been raised. That specific choice, to confirm the decision publicly rather than manage it privately, communicated something beyond the decision itself. It communicated that the process had been correctly challenged and correctly defended, and that the outcome of that challenge was not in doubt. Camilla withdrew from the meeting shortly afterward. A senior palace aide prepared an internal household briefing note confirming the restored schedule. According to sources familiar with its contents, it was distributed to relevant household members within hours. It did not reference the confrontation directly. It did not name Camilla or Anne in relation to the dispute. It simply confirmed the original arrangement as the operative schedule going forward. That administrative silence was itself the message. The Queen Consort had attempted to move a boundary. The boundary had been restored, without drama, without extended explanation, without any acknowledgement in the official record that anything significant had taken place. That is how the palace handles moments it wants to correct, without creating a permanent institutional record of the conflict. But sources say the private record is entirely clear about what happened and what it meant. The corridor incident sits alongside the Tom Parker Bowles episode, the Annabelle Elliott removal, and the household patronage decisions as part of a consistent documented pattern. Individually, each incident has a procedural explanation. Together, they tell a story about where the operational center of gravity inside the British monarchy actually sits in 2026. And that center of gravity is not sitting where Camilla's title says it should. Subscribe to Palace Drop right now and hit the bell. This is what we do every single week. Named sources, documented institutional context, the full picture behind what the palace puts in its official communications. You do not want to find this channel 3 months from now and have to catch up on everything you missed. The immediate consequence was the restored schedule and the administrative confirmation that followed. Clean, documented, operationally decisive. The lasting consequence is what sources describe as more significant and more permanent than any single meeting outcome. Every person who was in that corridor now carries a specific and indelible piece of information about what happens when Camilla's preferences come into direct conflict with Anne's institutional position. Anne wins, not through confrontation, not through raised voices or public drama, through the process itself siding with her, through Charles confirming her position in front of witnesses, through the administrative record reflecting the outcome she demanded. That information moves through a palace household without announcement, without formal distribution, but completely, and with a persistence that individual incidents rarely have because it was witnessed rather than reported. Camilla's rehabilitation over 20 years rested on the careful management of one central operational dynamic, that her presence within the royal household represents a forward-looking institutional acceptance rather than a continued source of internal friction. The corridor incident damaged that dynamic in a specific and difficult-to-reverse way. It suggested to the people who run the operational machinery of the palace that when Camilla's preferences conflict with established institutional process, the process does not yield to her. That when her authority is challenged by someone with deeper institutional roots, the challenge succeeds, and that the king himself, when forced to choose between his wife's position and his sister's procedural challenge, confirms the challenge. That is not a small piece of information for a palace household to absorb. Sources familiar with Camilla's position describe her as acutely aware of the shift, in the way that someone who has spent 20 years building their position inside a complex institution becomes aware when something load-bearing has been quietly weakened. William was informed of the outcome. His response was not described as surprise. Sources familiar with the current dynamic between William and Anne describe their operational alignment as one of the most significant institutional facts inside the palace right now. Not a formal alliance, not a coordinated campaign with meetings and agreed strategies. a shared understanding of what the institution requires, and a shared willingness to act on that understanding when the moment demands it. That shared understanding is what Charles found himself caught between in that corridor, and his decision confirmed which side of it carried more institutional weight. What this episode reveals about the monarchy in 2026 goes significantly beyond one household confrontation about one schedule. Charles is 76 years old and managing a cancer diagnosis while maintaining the full ceremonial and constitutional demands of a reigning monarch. His capacity for absorbing sustained internal conflict has reduced. His instinct has shifted increasingly toward institutional stability over domestic comfort. When he was forced to choose between confirming his wife's unilateral decision and restoring the established process, he chose the process. That choice is a data point about where his priorities sit right now, not because he does not love Camilla, but because he understands that the institution he inherited depends on processes that exist independently of any individual's preferences. When those processes are bypassed, the institution looks weak. When they are confirmed in the face of a direct challenge, the institution demonstrates that it functions as designed. Anne understood this framework before it needed to be explained to anyone. She has understood it for 50 years. It is precisely why her challenge to Camilla's schedule change was framed as a procedural question rather than a personal confrontation. A procedural question framed correctly cannot be dismissed as jealousy or personal resentment. It can only be answered procedurally or left unanswered. The wider implication for Camilla is the clarification of a boundary she may have believed was more flexible than it actually is. Her title is secure while Charles is alive and reigning. Her public appearances continue. Her ceremonial role is maintained. The institutional machinery of the monarchy continues to function on her behalf in its official dimensions, but the operational reality inside the household has been clarified in a way that paperwork cannot undo. When Anne and Camilla's preferences conflict in the operational space of the palace, the institution sides with Anne. That clarification now exists as an institutional fact, independent of any future individual decision or relationship dynamic. Sources familiar with the longer arc of palace dynamics describe what happened in that corridor as consistent with a broader pattern of institutional realignment that has been building across the past 18 months. A pattern in which the operational center of gravity of the British monarchy is gradually but consistently moving toward the priorities and the people who represent what comes after Charles. That movement is not being announced. It is not being described in any official communication. It is visible in administrative records, in patronage decisions, in the outcomes of internal institutional disputes like the one that played out in that corridor. But it is real, and it is documented, and the direction it is moving in has been consistent across every instance we have covered on this channel. Away from the present, toward the future. Away from Camilla, toward the people who will determine what this monarchy looks like after Charles. The corridor is empty now. The briefing note has been filed. The restored schedule has been confirmed and distributed. From the outside, everything looks exactly as it did before that morning. But inside the operational reality of the palace, something was clarified in that room that cannot be unclassified and that no official statement will ever directly address. Anne asked one question in the language of institutional process. The institution answered her. Charles confirmed the answer in front of witnesses. And Camilla departed that meeting understanding something about her own position that the title of Queen Consort has never been able to fully guarantee. That the operational authority of the palace she has spent 20 years trying to make her home does not ultimately answer to her title. It answers to the process, and the process in July 2026 answers to Anne. Subscribe to Palace Drop and hit the bell. Every week we go deeper on the stories the palace does not want mapped. The palace has a version of every story. This is the other one. Next on Palace Drop, we are going inside a state banquet that stopped completely. A piece of jewelry that should never have been worn. We are going even deeper inside the palace. More documents, more sources, More of the story the official version leaves out. If what you watched today gave you the full picture, what is coming next adds the layer underneath it. Subscribe now and hit the bell so you are here when it drops. You do not want to find this channel 3 months from now and have to catch up on everything you missed.